Late one night, Wyatt was suddenly woken up by an unsettling noise coming from his backyard. Trusting his instincts, he quickly checked the live feed from his outdoor security camera, expecting to see a wild animal or a tree branch moving in the wind. Instead, the camera showed something that made Wyatt's heart race, pushing him to take quick action. Without a second thought, he grabbed his phone to call the cops, dialing the number with trembling hands. Wyatt held his breath as he listened to the beeps, waiting for someone to answer the phone. "Come on, pick up already," he murmured. It was all taking way too long. He paced around the room, keeping his eyes on the live camera feed the whole time, not daring to let it out of his sight. He was becoming a bit desperate when finally he heard a voice on the other end of the line. "Good night, this is Officer Samuels. What can I do for you?" The officer greeted him, and Wyatt immediately breathed a sigh of relief. Help would be on its way soon. "Officer, I need your help. I realize how bizarre this must sound, but there are bears dancing in my backyard," he exclaimed, fully aware of how strange the situation was. Then it remained silent for a few moments, and Wyatt almost thought that the officer had ended their call. "Hello? Can anyone hear me?" he asked, ready to dial the number again, only to catch Officer Samuels stifling a laugh. "Ahem, my apologies," the officer managed, clearing his throat. "Did you say there are bears dancing in your garden?" he asked. "Yes, they are dancing around a fire, performing some kind of dance. I have footage I can send to you. Please, send someone over quickly," Wyatt replied, but he immediately lost all hope. The officer was wheezing with laughter now, and Wyatt heard him call out to his colleagues. "Hey, this guy's calling about dancing bears in his garden." Laughter erupted in the background, and Wyatt angrily slammed down his phone. He knew that the officers didn't believe him, and the worst part was that he couldn't even really blame them. He probably wouldn't have believed it either. It was clear that he was on his own. Even if he called the police again and another officer picked up, they would probably still laugh at him. Rushing to a window for a better view, Wyatt carefully peeked outside, making sure not to attract the bears' attention. The live sight of them was far more unsettling than any footage, but despite his fear, Wyatt couldn't manage to look away. He was way too curious to find out what the heck was actually going on. Once he had calmed down a bit, he pulled a chair up to the window and sat down to comfortably observe those strange bears, his fear gradually turning into fascination. He had concluded that he was going to be safe inside his home. As long as he didn't go outside, nothing could happen to him. Or, well, that was what he thought. He calmly observed everything they did. After a while, they stopped dancing and sat down on logs placed around the fire. They just sat like that for some time, and then something unexpected happened that almost made Wyatt scream with fear. The bears, all 10 of them, suddenly turned around and looked him right in the eyes. Wyatt held his breath once again, and he was unable to move. The bears all got up from the logs and took a few steps in his direction. Instantly, the fear came rushing back, and Wyatt jumped up from his chair and ran back to his bedroom, locking the door behind him. This couldn't be happening. Wyatt's fingers dug into his skin, a sharp reminder that he wasn't dreaming. The absurdity of bears, dancing bears no less, seemed like a feverish nightmare. Yet there he was, wide awake in the dead of night, heart pounding in his chest. The reality of the situation was as hard to digest as the idea of it being a dream. Back on the phone, Wyatt's voice cracked, desperation seeping into every word. "Please, you've got to believe me. It's not a joke." But the cool dismissal he received in return felt like a slap. The officer's warning of potential fines for misuse of emergency services was the last thing Wyatt wanted to hear. Feeling more isolated than ever, he hung up, defeated. Frustration swelled within him as the officer's words echoed in his mind. Pranks? Fines? Was there no end to this night's madness? Wyatt couldn't fathom how his genuine fear was mistaken for a juvenile attempt at humor. The world outside seemed to mock him, silent and indifferent to his plight. The disconnect between his reality and their disbelief was a chasm too wide. Returning to his post by the window, Wyatt found the backyard transformed. The bears were gone, leaving behind the fire, which now seemed to burn with an almost sinister glow. The quiet was unsettling. Had they really been there? The absence of his uninvited guests brought an eerie calm, leaving Wyatt to question his sanity in the silence of the night. Relief was a fleeting visitor, fluttering through Wyatt's chest. The void left by the bear's absence was a double-edged sword. Yes, the immediate threat seemed to have vanished, but the questions and fears it stirred remained. Wyatt found himself caught between relief and a gnawing sense of unease. What did the night still hold for him? It seemed that only time would tell. Wyatt's sleep was anything but peaceful. His mind replayed the bizarre dance of the bears in a loop, blending reality with surreal nightmares. Every shadow in his dreams morphed into bears, every sound a growl. Despite the exhaustion tugging at his eyelids, sleep brought no escape, only a continuation of the night's madness in a different realm. Waking up felt like emerging from a deep, dark pool. The sunlight streaming through the window did little to dispel the heaviness of the night's events. Yet, as Wyatt rubbed the sleep from his eyes, the terror seemed silly, almost laughable. Could it all have been a trick of the light? A shadow play for his tired mind? The morning light was a balm, making fears seem like mere phantoms. As the day unfolded, Wyatt found himself caught up in the familiar whirl of life. Meetings, emails, coffee breaks. Each mundane task helped chip away at the remnants of last night's fear. Laughter with colleagues over lunch seemed to seal away the night's events into a box marked "unexplained." It was easy, comforting even, to let normalcy wash over him, diluting the terror into insignificance. The evening brought with it a chance for redemption. Surrounded by friends, laughter, and the clink of glasses, Wyatt felt miles away from the solitary fear of the previous night. Stories were shared, drinks were raised in toasts, and for a few precious hours, the world was nothing but the warm glow of companionship and the buzz of alcohol. The bears were nothing more than a bizarre anecdote, eliciting chuckles and disbelieving shakes of the head. As the night wore on and the laughter died down, the memory of dancing bears became like a story from someone else's life. The absurdity of it, when spoken aloud, seemed to shrink, losing its power. Wyatt allowed the tide of normalcy to sweep him along, the eerie glow of the fire and the surreal dance fading into the background of his mind, tucked away as a strange, distant dream. Yet a part of him still couldn't help shake the feeling that he hadn't imagined it. Just as Wyatt began to drift into a deep sleep, a chilling sound sliced through the night, yanking him back to wakefulness. The sound was too distinct, too unnervingly familiar. It couldn't be ignored. With a sinking heart, Wyatt realized the night's earlier peace was nothing but a brief interlude. The surreal had not left him. It was beckoning him once more. Nervously, Wyatt approached the window. The scene before him, a haunting echo of the past. There they were again, the bears encircling the fire, their movements eerily synchronized. It was as if the previous night had been merely a rehearsal, and now they were back for their final performance. The sight sent his heart into a frenetic dance of its own, matching the bizarre ballet outside. As if on cue, the dance ceased, and a dozen pairs of eyes locked onto Wyatt's. The connection was electric, a palpable tension stretching across the night air. Time itself seemed to pause, the only movement the flickering flames casting long shadows. Wyatt felt an inexplicable pull, a silent command from their gaze that anchored him to the spot, unable to look away or move. Wyatt's breath fogged up the glass, the only evidence of his presence as he stood, transfixed. The bears resumed their dance, a performance that felt both threatening and mesmerizing. Despite the fear paralyzing him, a part of Wyatt was captivated, drawn into the spectacle with a mix of horror and wonder. It was as though the night had conspired to show him a world beyond his wildest dreams or nightmares. But as the minutes stretched on, a resolve hardened within Wyatt. He would not let this fear dominate him, nor would he allow these creatures, real or not, to dictate his reactions. Stepping back from the window, he drew a deep, steadying breath. There was a mystery here, one he couldn't unravel from behind the safety of glass. Wyatt knew what he had to do. Tonight, he wouldn't run. As the bears neared, one extended its paw, pressing it against the window with a human-like curiosity. Wyatt's breath hitched, trapped in a moment of surreal connection. The cold glass was the only barrier between his world and theirs, a thin line separating reality from the unfathomable. The gesture, so gentle and exploratory, contradicted every instinct Wyatt had about these wild creatures. The moment of mutual curiosity shattered as fear surged through Wyatt's veins. The bravery that had momentarily anchored him dissipated, chased away by the primal fear of being so close to not only a bear, but also the unknown. With a burst of adrenaline, he turned on his heel, fleeing to the perceived safety of another room. The solid walls around him offered scant comfort against the inexplicable. Huddled in the dark, Wyatt's only companion was the soft glow of his phone. His fingers danced across the screen, desperation driving him to seek answers where logic failed. Could there be any precedent, any shred of explanation for what he was witnessing? But the internet, vast as it was, held no stories of bears with human tendencies, leaving Wyatt drowning in a sea of unanswered questions. As he scrolled, the hope of finding something, anything that could explain the night's events, dwindled. Each click felt like a step further into isolation, the glowing screen a beacon of modernity that offered no bridge to the impossible reality outside his window. The digital world, with its endless knowledge, was silent on the matter, leaving Wyatt to grapple with the unexplainable alone. The lack of answers only fueled Wyatt's turmoil. With each passing moment, the line between reality and the surreal seemed to blur further. He was left alone in the quiet of the night, the weight of the unknown pressing down on him. The bears, with their unnervingly human gestures, remained an enigma wrapped in the darkness, a riddle that defied the rational world Wyatt thought he knew. As dawn crept through the curtains, casting a soft glow into the room, Wyatt's resolve solidified. He grabbed his phone, fingers hovering before tapping out a message to his closest friends. He needed their help, but didn't want to seem crazy as he left out the bewildering details of the previous night. The uncertainty of how they would respond weighed on him, but he hit send, the message now floating in the digital ether. One by one, the replies trickled in, each friend voicing their support, their words a mix of concern and curiosity. No one probed for details. Their trust was implicit, their willingness to stand by him unquestioned. The warmth of their assurances wrapped around Wyatt, a stark contrast to the cold fear that had gripped him. It was a reminder that he wasn't alone, that others were willing to face the unknown with him. That evening, as his friends arrived, the atmosphere in Wyatt's living room shifted from tension to camaraderie. He greeted each one with heartfelt thanks, the relief in his voice unmistakable. The group, once scattered, was now a circle of faces, each reflecting a spectrum of emotions: worry, curiosity, solidarity. Wyatt waited, the weight of his story pressing on his shoulders, until the last friend stepped through the door. With everyone settled, Wyatt stood, the room hushed in anticipation. His gratitude hung in the air, tangible, as he cleared his throat, ready to divulge the incredible. "Thank you for coming," he began. "What I'm about to share might sound out there." The room was a tableau of rapt attention, and friends braced for the unknown, their open minds a balm to Wyatt's frayed nerves. Explaining this won't do it justice, Wyatt admitted, moving to his laptop. His hands were steady as he opened it, a silent invitation for his friends to gather around. The screen flickered to life, the cursor blinking like a beacon. "I'm going to show you," he said, a decision made. Words had failed him before, but the evidence, he hoped, would bridge the gap between his reality and their understanding. Huddled around the laptop, the air thick with anticipation, Wyatt's confidence began to falter. His fingers flew over the keyboard, searching, but the video that was supposed to prove everything seemed to have disappeared into thin air. The room filled with a tense silence, the kind that amplifies every click and scroll as Wyatt's hunt turned up empty. Wyatt's frustration grew with every passing second, the absence of the footage gnawing at him. Had it been deleted? Or worse, had he imagined it all? No, that couldn't be. The desperation to find any piece of evidence led him to scour his laptop's every folder, but it was as if the video had vanished, leaving no trace behind. Despite the setback, Wyatt turned to face his friends, the urgency clear in his voice. "Listen, I know how this sounds, but you have to believe me," he implored, his eyes scanning theirs for any sign of skepticism. He recounted every detail of the encounters, his narrative painting a vivid picture of the surreal events. The room was still, his friends absorbing the gravity of his words. As Wyatt's story unfolded, his friends' expressions transformed from casual curiosity to something deeper, more contemplative. There was no laughter, no disbelief, only a shared sense of wonder and concern. Their silence was a testament to their respect for Wyatt, a solidarity that said more than words ever could. They were with him in this strange and inexplicable journey. With the story told, Wyatt made his request. "Stay with me tonight. You'll see them, the bears, with your own eyes." The plea hung in the air, a mix of hope and anxiety. To his relief, his friends nodded, their agreement a lifeline thrown in the darkness of doubt. Tonight, they would stand by Wyatt, come what may, ready to face the unknown together. The evening air buzzed with a mix of tension and determination as Wyatt and his friends laid out their unconventional arsenal. Kitchen pans, wooden spoons, and a set of speakers. Tools not typically wielded in defense, but tonight, they were their chosen weapons. Laughter and jokes punctuated the preparations, a light-hearted veneer over the undercurrent of apprehension about what lay ahead. The calm of the night was shattered by the clanging of pans and the bass thumping from the speakers. Each sound check and practice swing with the makeshift noisemakers served a dual purpose, rehearsing their plan and bolstering their courage. The laughter faded as the reality of their situation settled in, replaced by a focused seriousness. They were ready, or as ready as they could ever be. As the sun dipped below the horizon, a shared glance among the friends communicated what words could not. It was time. The makeshift camp they had set up in Wyatt's living room was a stark reminder of the surreal nature of their vigil. Conversation dwindled, giving way to a collective introspection. They were united by a common goal: to stand with Wyatt against the unfathomable. The strategy was to catch some sleep before the expected encounter, but the atmosphere was charged with too much anticipation for rest. They lay in the dark, a pact of solidarity binding them. Whispers of encouragement occasionally pierced the silence, a testament to the strength of their bond. Wyatt, however, remained wide awake. He needed to show his friends he wasn't crazy. Alone with his thoughts, Wyatt replayed the plan in his mind, each scenario more fantastical than the last. The weight of expectation lay heavily on his shoulders. His friends had put their trust in him, believing in a threat they hadn't seen. As the night wore on, his determination grew. Whatever came their way, they would face it together. Tonight, the unknown would meet its match. The familiar bone-chilling sound sliced through the stillness, jerking Wyatt from his anxious reverie. Adrenaline surged as he realized the moment of truth had arrived. This night, the endless cycle of fear and uncertainty would break. With a newfound resolve steeling him, Wyatt was ready. The nightmare that had plagued his backyard would finally confront a determined adversary. Peering out into the velvet darkness, Wyatt's gaze locked onto the moving shadows that had become hauntingly familiar. The sight of the bears, once a source of dread, now sparked a defiant fire within him. Their silhouettes against the flickering light of the backyard no longer represented fear, but a challenge he was prepared to face head-on. Heart pounding, Wyatt turned to rally his friends, only to find the living room abandoned. The emptiness echoed his shock and disbelief. Where had they gone? The plan had been clear, and their roles had been set. The realization that he was alone, that his allies had inexplicably disappeared, sent a wave of dread crashing over him. Driven by a mix of fear and urgency, Wyatt raced through the house, each room's emptiness amplifying his despair. The quiet that filled the spaces seemed to mock him, a cruel reminder of his isolation. Panic clawed at his throat as the reality of the situation set in. His friends and support had vanished, leaving him to face the looming threat alone. The truth hit Wyatt with the force of a physical blow. His friends, the ones who had promised to stand by him, were out there, possibly inches from danger. The protective walls of his home now felt like a barrier, keeping him from them when they might need him most. Alone, he was forced to confront a stark new reality. The battle he had prepared for was already unfolding outside, beyond his reach. Wyatt burst into the backyard, his breath catching at the sight before him. One of his friends stood, frozen, encircled by the towering, dark figures of the bears. This was a moment Wyatt had dreaded, yet never truly imagined would come to pass. The stark moonlight cast eerie shadows, making the scene appear as a nightmarish tableau sprung from the depths of fear itself. With no time to hesitate, Wyatt's adrenaline kicked into overdrive. His plan, designed for many, now rested solely on his shoulders. Clutching a pan in one hand and a portable speaker in the other, he launched into action. His movements were fueled by a mix of fear and an unwavering resolve to protect his friend, to disrupt this surreal encroachment by any means necessary. The quiet of the night shattered under the assault of blaring music and the clamor of Wyatt's improvised weapons. He moved like a man possessed, striking at the shadows, a solitary figure against the darkness. The music, loud enough to wake the neighborhood, and the metallic clang of pan against pan became his war cry, a defiant stand against the encroaching darkness. Wyatt charged forward, his every instinct focused on breaking through to his friend. The fear that had once paralyzed him was now buried under the imperative to act, to save. Each step brought him closer, the sound of his makeshift arsenal a constant companion. The bears, caught off guard by the intensity of his assault, hesitated, their figures looming large in the dim light. Despite the chaos Wyatt unleashed, the bears showed a surprising resilience. Their numbers seemed to swell in the darkness, an intimidating force that no amount of noise or bravado seemed to diminish. Wyatt realized the scale of the challenge he faced. He was one against many, and it might not pan out how he originally had hoped. As Wyatt braced for another charge, the tumultuous night air suddenly stilled, the chaos halting as if paused by an unseen hand. The bears, moments ago a formidable presence, seemed to crumble where they stood, confusing Wyatt further. The once so scary creatures seemed to twist into ways he couldn't believe were real as Wyatt's heart began pounding in his chest. The confusion that clouded Wyatt's mind cleared in an instant, giving way to sheer astonishment. As the figures began to stir, the outlines of the bear being's suits became unmistakable, and one by one, his friends emerged, laughter spilling from within the costumes. The reality of the situation dawned on him. The menacing bears were nothing more than fabric and fluff. a prank orchestrated by those he trusted most. The moment of realization struck Wyatt with the force of a thunderclap, leaving him speechless. What he had feared, what had tormented him, was all an elaborate joke. Relief washed over him, mingling with the remnants of fear, as the absurdity of the situation set in. The threat had never been real, only a ruse, crafted with meticulous care to fool him. As the bare heads were removed, revealing the grinning faces of his comrades, the air filled with laughter. Wyatt's initial shock gave way to disbelief, then to amusement, as the reality of the prank sank in. There, under the night sky, surrounded by friends disguised as his fears, Wyatt found himself laughing along, the tension of the night dissolving into the absurdity of the moment. The elaborate deception, rooted in a past joke taken too far, stirred a whirlwind of emotions in Wyatt. Betrayal flickered briefly, overshadowed by the overwhelming relief that the nightmare was over. As the laughter continued, any lingering feelings of anger melted away, replaced by a sense of camaraderie. The night, which had started with fear, ended with a shared laughter, a memorable tale they would recount for years to come. As Wyatt's initial shock dissipated, he couldn't help but feel a grudging respect for the elaborate ruse his friends had pulled off. The effort, the planning, and the execution, it was all incredibly detailed and complex. What had seemed like a nightmare was actually a testament to their creativity and dedication to the joke. It was hard not to admire their commitment, even if it was at his expense. The overwhelming relief flooding through him quickly doused any spark of anger or frustration that flared within Wyatt. The fear, the tension, the sleepless nights, all were the result of an elaborate prank. Understanding this transformed his fleeting irritation into an appreciation for the lengths his friends had gone to, all for the sake of a laugh. Learning that the video footage had been deliberately erased as part of the prank added another layer to the deception. This revelation stirred a mix of emotions in Wyatt: irritation at the erasure of evidence, awe at the thoroughness of their planning. It was a detail so small yet critical, a testament to the depth of their scheme, equally infuriating and impressive. As the full extent of the prank settled in, Wyatt found himself oscillating between mild annoyance and a budding desire for retribution. The genius behind their plot had sparked a competitive streak in him, a challenge he was now eager to accept. The gears in his mind began to turn, plotting a comeback that would strike a perfect balance between creativity and surprise. In the end, camaraderie and the infectious nature of shared laughter triumphed over any lingering thoughts of payback. The ordeal had woven itself into the fabric of their shared history, a legendary tale they would all recount with gusto. Yet, amidst the mirth, Wyatt's promise of retribution lingered in the air, a playful threat that ensured the cycle of jokes and laughter would continue among them.